So we're going to start with just understanding networks. All right. Now, I know for a lot of you that have been doing this, you're like, really? We got to go over basic networking? Yes. Remember, this is a client exam. It's kind of a basic exam. They're going to be talking about basic networking. So you got to understand work groups, domains. You got to understand all that stuff. Hybrids. So yes, that's where we're going to start. So for the first couple of days, we're going to talk about building an on-site network properly and what you should do. And then we'll move into Azure. Okay? Any questions before we get going? All right, good. And listen, everybody, one final thing. Relax. Enjoy the class. This is not a hard test. It's not. Okay? So just sit back, enjoy the class, have a good time, learn everything you want. Obviously, pick up as much as you can. Don't worry about the test at all. The study guide's going to help you get through it. So just pick up everything so that you know how to do it at work. I'll get you through the test. Okay? All right. Now, one final thing. If you are to my class for the first time, I am a whiteboard junkie. If I don't write on a whiteboard in every 10 minutes, I need a fix. I have a lot of slides. We're not going to cover them all because a lot of the things I'm going to do just by whiteboarding it. I'd like to just show it and whiteboard it as I talk about it because I can kind of just keep my own pace and keep everybody up. So even though I got a lot of slides on this, we're going to do most of this by just doing it on the whiteboard. Okay? So, all right. So let's talk about basic networking. All right. And yes, this is a 2-hour class for the 2 weeks. All right? So, all right. Hold on. Let me just clear the chat. You know, my mouse is still having problems. For everybody who understands that, my mouse is still having issues. Crazy. Okay. Understanding networks. You know, I'm deaf. I'm going blind. I need my glasses so I can see what I'm writing. Okay. So the first thing we got to understand is just some networking basic terms, so that as we're going through them in this class, you understand everything that we're actually talking about. Okay? You know, Microsoft did an update a couple months ago. Some of you may have been affected by this. But if you have a system that has dual monitors, the mouse cuts out between the two monitors. There's no fix. The only fix, believe it or not, this is Microsoft's solution, and this just shows you what they're doing. Install Windows 11. That's what I was told. Install Windows 11. So it's almost like they're keeping this bug out there to force us to go to Windows 11. But what I got to do is I got to do a Control-Delete. I got to release the Task Manager just so it releases my mouse, and then I can click on it. It's absolutely nuts, and this has been going for months. So every time I go from the one screen to the other to try to clear out the chat, or I got to do a Control-Delete and clear out the Task Manager. It's the only way it works. And there's no way to fix it. So, and it was through a patch. It's kind of funny. So, all right. So let's talk about some networking. Okay. Yeah, that's what it is, Seth. Anything to get you to upgrade. So, all right. Now let's start with just some basic fundamentals so that you understand what I'm talking about in terminology. Now, years ago when I got into networking, there were only two types of networks. You had server-based and peer-to-peer. Now, when Microsoft entered no, John, I can't. They don't tell you what update it is. Yeah, thanks. No, it doesn't work. I looked at that option too. So, server versus peer-to-peer. So, when Microsoft first got into networking, okay, they were not the Microsoft of today. When they first got in, their very first network was a thing called Windows for Workgroups. It was horrible. And that eventually became Workgroups, the peer-to-peer network. Microsoft never ever uses the same name as anyone else in the industry. Most people just said, yeah, that's our peer-to-peer, or that's our server-based network. Microsoft decided to name theirs. They decided that their peer-to-peer was going to be called a workgroup. Now, the things about a work group that you got to understand is that on a peer-to-peer network, they would always tell you that you should never have more than 10 PCs. If you have more than 10, then you might as well go to a server-based network. All right? Microsoft, when they released work groups, again, they can't be the same as everybody else. They took their network and went from 10 to 12. So if you used a Microsoft work group as a peer-to-peer, you could get 12 users instead of just 10. Again, always just try to edge it out. So on a workgroup environment, if you want it to function properly, you don't want to have more than 12 PCs. You can, but it can cause problems down the road. So 12 or less. Now, here's the problem with a workgroup. Every single machine works as a client and as a server. The clients actually work as servers because on a workgroup, there's normally no server. All of the client machines are the same machines where you might hand out files to other people. I mean, it's still a network. People can still access your box and grab files. All that's the same. The only difference is there's no centralized server to do it. You have to do it on each individual machine. And that's where the problems start to begin. In a workgroup environment, there is no master database that controls the network. There's tiny little databases on every single Windows 10 or Windows 11 client. That little database is called a SAM. All right, it's called a SAM, a Security Accounts Management Database. Every Windows machine, except a domain controller, has a SAM. Domain controllers don't have local SAMs because they are there for the domain. So they don't have local accounts. But it doesn't matter. If you're running any other server, and it's not a domain controller, or you're running any Windows client, you have a SAM. Now, this is important to understand for a lot of reasons. One, because it's really going to determine how the network works. And two, for hacking. Understanding that you don't have a centralized database means that you have to go out of your way to protect each individual client even more. Because the database to get onto that network is just sitting on the client machine. Let me put you out on a server for a second. This is my Hyper-V server. It's not a domain controller, so that's why I'm showing it. All right? This is my Hyper-V server. Let me go into my C drive. Let's go into Windows. All right? And when we get into our Windows, I want to, let's show you the, I think I'll show you where the SAM is. Let's show you where the SAM is. So it's going to be under System 32 and Config. So let's show you the SAM. Sorry, had a moment there. System 32 and Config, right here. You ready for this? There's the SAM database. The database that controls all of the users on every Windows machine sits under the Windows directory. Now, honestly, for you, in your day-to-day work, this doesn't matter. You're never going to probably look at this. It doesn't matter. But you got to understand that it's there. Because if I'm a hacker and I get onto your box, this is the file I'm going after. If I crack this, I just cracked your network. Because this file right here contains your usernames and your passwords. This is the actual database to get you onto the machines. That's why it's so important to understand that this SAM exists. Now, if you're on a domain, this SAM is not nearly as important, and I'll explain why. But on a work group, this SAM is what controls the network. Each box has its own. Now, that also brings up a whole bunch of other problems. For example, I sit down at this machine. I know, looks just like me, doesn't it? All right, so I sit down at that machine. What do I need to log into that box? I need a username, and I need a password. All right, I get up, and I sit down here. To log into that box, what do I need? Well, I need a username, and I need a password. Okay, you ready for this? This is not the same account. Doesn't matter that the words are physically the same. Because each SAM is its own database, each one of these accounts is its own unique account. So, if I have 10 PCs and 10 users that need to be able to access all 10 PCs, for this network here, I got to build 100 accounts. I got to put all 10 on all 10 machines. This is one of the worst networks to manage in the world. There's no centralized management. There's no centralized security. There's no centralized storage. This is the worst network you can be on. And it's amazing how many times I have new people that come through classes and that's what they want to work on. Because they're a little bit nervous about working in a domain. And work groups are much smaller. They're usually less than 12 people. It's a smaller network. It must be easier to manage. It's not. Believe it or not, this network is probably harder to manage than a domain with 250 people. I would rather manage a domain of 250 people than manage this domain. Because at least on a domain, I can manage it all from one box. So not only do you have to understand the SAM because of hacking, you also have to understand the SAM because it's on every single machine and you have to have an account if you want to get onto that box. Now, by the way, if this is one of your first classes with me, if you fall behind or you don't understand something, if I explain something and you don't understand it, please ask. Do not be shy in this class. Okay? You can ask anything you want. All right. Now, on this type of network, can I install a server? The answer is yes. The server is not going to control the network. It's just, let's say we're putting this in to be a file server. So I just need a spot where I can manage my files from one location. So I'm going to put a file server into this network. Because this file server is on a workgroup, it has a very unique name. What do you call a server that's part of a workgroup? Anybody know? What do they call a server that is a member of a workgroup? Thank you, John. It's called a standalone. The reason they call it a standalone is because it stands on its own. It is not part of another network. It is part of just a little workgroup. And believe it or not, this box also has a SAM, just like every other box. Remember, there's no centralized database. So all 10 of these users also have to be entered into this SAM of the server so they can access the server. So now I got to build 110 accounts for this network. Plus, there's no security, which means that if people want to secure their files, they're going to put their own passwords on. Anybody here ever work in a company where end users put in their own passwords for files? It is a nightmare. Because it would be a little different if maybe they set up a password and then wrote it down, but they don't. And before you know it, they start forgetting all their passwords and you're using all kinds of hacking tools so that you can crack into a Word document just so they can get their file back. Because they password protected it and forgot what the password was. This network is a horrible network to work on. So, what can we do to change it? Well, we can get rid of that server SAM. Let's get rid of the SAM and let's make this a box that controls the network. That type of box is what we call a domain controller. And I'm going to explain what each box does in a minute. Just so you, I think everybody knows this, but I'm just going to explain it anyway. So it's domain controller. Now at that point, that's the actual name of the box. The box is going to be called a domain controller. Once you make a box a domain controller, that box no longer has a SAM. Let me show you something. There's an easy way to always tell. Okay? Now, John asked, can you PowerShell management the network? Yes, but on a workgroup, because there's no centralized database, you still have to have an account on every box, and inside of PowerShell, you have to make sure that remote management is turned on so that you can manage these boxes remotely. But yes, you can definitely do this through PowerShell. Yes. All right, good question. So, what happens when I install a domain controller? All right, let me show you something real quick. This is that same server. I can literally see that this box has a local SAM. The way I do it is I just go into System. All right? Just go up to System. All right? When you go into System, you'll actually see that it's part of a workgroup. But also, one way that I check it out is I go into disk management. Computer management. Watch, let me show you something. Inside of computer management, a machine with a SAM is going to have an extra tool. You see this right here? Local users and groups. That will not be on a domain controller. So if you need to see if a box is a domain controller or not, the easiest way is just go into computer management. If it has local users and groups, it's not a domain controller. As I said earlier, domain controllers don't have local users. They only have domain users. So watch. Let me show you what a domain controller looks like. So let me put you on the domain controller. By the way, this is Windows Server 2022. This is the one we're going to be showing in class. We are going to build a Windows client. All right, we'll build either Windows 10 or Windows 11, whatever everybody wants to do. So we're going to actually, I have one set up, but we're going to build a client. So, but this is my server setup for this class. If I go into computer management on this server, you're going to notice that the local users and groups is gone. So if you're not sure a machine's a domain controller, yeah, obviously you can just see. Normally they have the tools, but here's the thing that people don't understand. I can make this box a domain controller and not install these tools. These are just tools. A lot of people don't put the tools on domain controllers because they might be managing the domain controllers remotely. So I've had people say to me, well, if it's a domain controller, you'll see all the Active Directory stuff. No, that's not always true. So you can go into System and see what type of box it is, or just go into computer management, because there is no way a domain controller will ever have local users. It's the easiest way to tell. And by the way, that same local users and groups is also on Windows 10, Windows 11 in computer management. So once I make a box a domain controller, the local users on the server is gone. Now, all of these SAMs on the local client still exist. But once you connect all the boxes to the domain, you don't need to use the local SAM anymore at all. Matter of fact, most of you don't. At this point, this is no longer a work group. It's now called a domain. The server-based is called a domain. So what happens is, once you connect all of the machines to the network, your users will log on by using a domain account. When they log in using a domain account, they bypass the SAM. It's not used at all. I mean, not even the littlest bit. They're using Active Directory to get into the network. And they're doing it from the domain controller. So believe it or not, that brings up another whole slew of questions you got to ask yourself. If I'm on a domain and I don't force my users to use local accounts, Do I need to have anything in the SAM? And honestly, the answer is no, you don't. There is no reason that you have to have any accounts inside of your SAM. As a matter of fact, unless you're giving your users permissions to manage their own box, you shouldn't have any accounts in the SAM. This way, if a hacker gets into the box and grabs the SAM, they are not getting any real accounts whatsoever. So, now, you may ask yourself, wait a second, hold on. That doesn't make sense. Because I know for a fact when I go home, I'm not on the domain. I'm sitting in my living room. And if I'm not on the domain, I still use my domain account to log into the box. So if the domain account is not in the SAM, how am I logging in when I'm not part of the domain? Think about it. You all log in at home. You're not logged into your domain at home. Usually you log in, then connect to the VPN and connect back into your domain. But you got to log in first and you use your domain account. So if that domain account is not stored in the SAM, how are you getting on the box? Well, believe it or not, it's stored in the registry. Your domain account is encrypted and stored inside of the registry. The local SAM doesn't get used, even at home. So the point I'm making is there's no reason that you need to put anybody in the local SAM unless you want them to manage the box. You want them to be able to do whatever they want to their own Windows box. But other than that, you don't even need to set up any local accounts. All right? Any questions so far? Good. Good. All right. Let's take a break. We're coming up to 1 o'clock. Let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about domains. And then we're going to talk about the different types of servers. And at least this way, you're starting to understand the basics so that as I continue on and I say domain controller, member server, standalone, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? All right, everybody. We're going to take 10 minutes. Again, if this is your first class with me, during the break, I open up my microphone. I stay in the studio, which is just in my house. I'm delivering this class from the top of a mountain in New Hampshire in a log cabin. Yes. Okay. So, I put some music on in the background. So basically just either hang out or get up, stretch your legs, go get a cup of coffee, get a cold drink. But enjoy your 10-minute break, and I'll see everybody on the other side of the break. Have a great break, everybody.